welcome to week 2 of Encounter. This week we're continuing the story about different people that have their encounter with Jesus and what happens to them. We're going to dive into the book of Luke today and talk about the 10 lepers. As you notice, my webcam might be a little different for you guys. My screen recording might be a little different. The background's different. There's a lot of change. I know. Bear with me as we go through this. I apologize for Sunday's video and the webcam the webcam that kept freezing. This new setup should have fixed this, I pray. So pray with me on that. But let's dive into it. So like I said, we are continuing our series on encounters. As we mentioned last week, an encounter is an unexpected meeting of at least two people. Now, when people encounter Jesus, crazy things happen. Last week we saw a crazy man in a cemetery whose life was saved by the death of 2,000 pigs. And I am completely in agreement with the thought of that this story could only happen in the Bible. So today we're going to look at not one, but 10 people that were healed by Jesus. So join me in Luke chapter 17, verses 11 to 19. Jesus was traveling to Jerusalem. He went from Galilee to Samaria, and he came to a small town, and 10 men met him there. They didn't come close to him because they all had leprosy. The men shouted, "Jesus, Master, help us!" When Jesus saw the men, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priest." And we'll talk about later why the priest specifically. While the 10 men were going to the priest, they were healed. When one of them saw that he was healed, he went back to Jesus, praised God loudly. He bowed down at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. That'll play a key role as we go through today's lesson. Jesus said, 10 men were healed. Where are the other 9? This man is not even one of our people. Is he the only one who came back to give praise to God? Then Jesus said to the man, "Stand up. You can go. You were healed because you believe." Now let's talk about leprosy for a bit. Leprosy was considered a contagious skin disease. People with leprosy were labeled as outcasts. They couldn't live with their family or their friends, but they had to live outside the community, usually in a designated leper colony, and they couldn't touch anyone in fear of spreading the disease. Now, Leviticus 13 has 56 different verses on how they treated and diagnosed leprosy in all the possible cases. I might do a video tomorrow, or tomorrow the day you're seeing this, that goes through Leviticus 13 and also Leviticus 14 that I'll mention a little bit later. So maybe, maybe not. I haven't quite decided yet, but we'll see. The people who had leprosy were usually mocked or ignored. No one stopped to help them or speak to them in any way. The bottom line is they were lonely and they were rejected. They were no longer able to feel a high five or a hug. No one wanted to be around them. Their own bodies were falling apart, and it was just a gross, sad, and miserable life. So here comes Jesus, and who knows what they knew or expected of him. I really doubt that they woke up that day and thought, today we're going to meet Jesus and be healed. Now, Luke notes that Jesus enters a village on the border of Galilee and Samaria. And this is significant because Jews had serious issues with the people of Samaria. We talked about it a little bit in the parable of the Good Samaritan. It was worse than a rivalry. It was the kind of hatred that racist people show today just because of a person's nationality, skin, color, or language. Now, the Jews look down on the Samaritans. Keep that in mind as we go through this. Now, the 10 lepers stood at a distance. How topical. Social distancing. As they were supposed to because of their disease. Now, however, they shouted at Jesus, "Master, have mercy on us." And this phrase was meant to be understood that if they showed mercy to Jesus, Jesus would then heal them. Now, the next part is doubly unexpected. Jesus looked at them. Now let that be known, just that short 4-word sentence, Jesus looked at them. This is big. This is because many people have ignored them. Leprosy had deformed them. Their faces had open sores, parts of them would have rotted off. No one wanted to look at them. And it's interesting that often when ministries who work with homeless people ask what bothers them the most, the top answer is a lack of eye contact. They feel like people won't even acknowledge that a human being is there. They don't mind if you don't give them money, but their heart breaks every time someone won't even give them a moment's glance, recognizing that they are still human. Luke 17:14. Beyond the look, Jesus tells them to go show yourselves to the priests. Now, this may sound weird, but the short version of why Jesus does this is to obey the Bible. The Jews had rules for all kinds of things, and Leviticus 14:2-32 gives rules for what to do when you've been healed from leprosy. And as I mentioned, I will talk about that in tomorrow's video if I do it as well. So 13 and 14, there's like 80 verses that we got to cover in a short period of time. I was going to do it within this video. I just felt like it would bog down this video too much and you would just tune out as I went through all 56 verses of 13. So I'm going to do a separate video, a follow-up video to it tomorrow. I probably will. I don't know yet. We'll see. The weird, unexpected part is how the men responded. They left. They obeyed Jesus, but they hadn't been healed yet. How do we know this? One little itty bitty phrase that shows up in verse 14 says, as they went. They weren't healed when Jesus saw them. They weren't even healed when Jesus spoke the word. Luke was the writer of this account and was a doctor, so he would have been the perfect eyewitness to record these details. And he writes very clearly, while the 10 men were going to the priests, they were healed. So just in simply trusting Jesus, they were shown the mercy they asked for. In going to do what anyone would do once they were healed, they healed as they went. And once again, if just when you think you've had enough of the unexpected crazy stuff, there's more. One of the men came back yelling, "Praise God!" When one of them saw that he was healed, he went back to Jesus. And not only did he come back, but he made a scene showing how he felt. He came back to Jesus shouting, he praised God loudly. He bowed down at Jesus' feet and thanked him. Keyword being one. One of them came back. Jesus asked the same thing I did when I first read this. 10 men are healed. Where's the other 9? Now, I don't think Jesus, demanded his people to say thank you. However, life was so bad for these lepers. They've been begging for mercy. They get it. And the only one who puts on hold the ritual at the temple to thank God who healed him. It's a bit ironic and it's a bit unexpected. While the other 9 raced off to do what was needed to be done so they could worship God in the temple, the one actually stopped and worshiped God in person. Now, as we mentioned, this guy was a Samaritan. The final unexpected punch here comes in a couple little notes that don't get our attention, but would have freaked out those who originally read it. At the end of verse 16, it says, he was a Samaritan. In verse 18, it says, this man comes from Jesus and says, this man isn't even one of our people. As we mentioned earlier, Jews could not stand Samaritans. They would have chosen the Samaritan to be the villain or the victim, but never the good guy. Never the one to do the right thing. And he's the best thing in the story. The assumption was that the other 9 lepers were all Jews. And lepers were so despised that they had to give up the prejudices that they held so closely when they were healthy because everyone had rejected them. They had just been lepers. Now they're healed. And the 9 people who the Jews would have picked to come back and thank Jesus were the ones that went straight to the temple, focused on the rules. The one they would have picked to remain sick was the one who bowed at the feet of God and praised Jesus for what he has done. He shows his thankful heart in Jesus. So to wrap up, and this is short, you know what? Because it's a short, we'll talk about Leviticus. We'll do that, I promise. So to close the lesson before we go to Leviticus, is I have a challenge for you guys. I have a challenge for you guys. To wrap up everything we talked about. Now I know, how can you do a challenge when you're in quarantine? Well, here's how. You may not be able to heal somebody like Jesus did, but you can cure them of one thing, and that thing is loneliness. It's hard to be lonely when someone genuinely cares about you and spends time with you. Now again, we're in quarantine, abide by social distancing rules, all that. But think of ways and think of who you can cure of loneliness this week. Not because it's something I'm telling you to do, but because it's the way that Jesus wants you to live your everyday life. This is a time where loneliness is probably at its highest. I talked about this a little bit last week. Think of somebody, a friend of yours, a family member, church family, stranger. Think of somebody who might be struggling during this time and just talk. Help them not feel so alone during this time and in the world as we know it. So that's my challenge to you. I hope you follow through with it. If you do, post it in the comments below. I'd love to hear the stories of all this. But before I wrap up with announcements, Leviticus 13, as we mentioned, has rules about skin diseases. I'm gonna try and synopsize this. It's long. Some of this might seem redundant, but these are the rules that the Jewish people followed. These are the rules that the Israelites followed. So bear with me. Like I said, there's probably between Leviticus 13 and 14, there's probably like 80 verses that we're going to cover, but stay with me, please. I'm begging you. Don't make me say all this and for nobody to listen. Okay. So here are the rules that they had about skin diseases. And if you see me looking this way, I'm reading it from Bible Gateway. And again, my translation is the easy to read version. What's easiest for me to read. So let's dive in. So if someone has a sore that looks like leprosy, the person needs to go to one of the priests. The priest is the one that determines, whether or not they had leprosy. The priest must look at the sores on the skin, and if the sore has white hair on it, and it seems deeper than the person's skin, then it's leprosy. And then the priest can decide whether the person is clean or unclean. Now, sometimes there's a white spot on the person's skin that doesn't go deeper, and if that's true, they must be quarantined for 7 days. How pertinent or how topical. On the seventh day, the priest does a reevaluation. If the sore hasn't changed and doesn't spread, the person's in quarantine for another 7. And if the sore is faded and hasn't spread, then the person is now cured, and the sore was then to be considered just a rash. And then after washing the clothes, the person's clean. Now, if the rash spreads over the skin and has shown himself, if the rash spreads over the skin, the person must go back to the priest. If the priest determines that the rash has spread, then it can be diagnosed as leprosy. Now, if there's a swelling on the skin and the hair's white and the skin is raw, I know this is the grossest thing you probably wanted to hear on a Wednesday, but the priest must say that the person has leprosy. There's no quarantine that needs to happen because he already knows that leprosy is starting to take over. A person could have a skin disease all throughout their body. If the priest sees that the skin disease covers the entire body and the skin is white, the person is clean. If the skin is raw, the person is not, and therefore he has leprosy. Therefore it can be determined that he has leprosy. If the raw skin changes and becomes white, then the person must come to the priest. If the skin then becomes white, the infection is clean and the person is cured. Now someone might get a boil. There's a lot. I was kind of overwhelmed when I saw this. Um, there's a lot of different like what if type scenarios. If there's a boil on the skin that heals over, then the boil might become a white swelling or a bright white spot with red streaks. The priest has to look at it. If the swelling is then deeper than the skin with white hair, the priest can diagnose that there's leprosy that came from uh, the boil, came from inside the boil. If the spot looks good, there's no hair, the spot's not deeper than the skin, then there's quarantine for 7 days. If the spot spreads, the person is not clean and therefore has an infection. If the bright spot stays in place and doesn't spread, it's just a scar and the person's okay. I know, take notes. There'll be a quiz at the end of this video. I'm kidding, maybe. Now, someone might get a burn, and if the raw skin becomes white or white with red streaks, the priest has to look at it. If it's deeper than the skin, the hair is white, that means leprosy has broke out and the person is diagnosed with leprosy. If the spot has no white hair and is not deeper than the skin but faded, there's 7-day quarantine. And on the 7th day, the priest must look at it again. If the spot has spread, therefore, then it becomes leprosy. If it hasn't spread but faded, it's only a scar and the person is okay. Someone might get an infection on the scalp or beard. Think about that, a beard infection. If the infection seems to be deeper than the skin and the hair around it is thin and yellow, then the person has a serious skin disease or probably leprosy. If the disease doesn't go deeper than the skin and there's no dark hair, there's the 7-day quarantine and be reevaluated. On the 7th day, if the disease hasn't spread, there's no yellow hairs growing in it, and it doesn't seem to be deeper than the skin, then the person must shave, but the disease area should not be shaved. And the priest must separate that person for 7 more days. Again, a reevaluation on day 7 goes, if the disease doesn't spread, it's not deeper than the skin, then the person's okay. Wash clothes, the person's clean. If it does spread, after the person becomes clean, there's a reevaluation, and if it has spread, the priest doesn't need to look for the yellow hair. There's the final definition of unclean. We talked about that a little bit earlier. If the priest believes that the disease stopped, there's black hair growing, the disease is then healed, and the person's good to go. I'm only about 3/4 of the way through this. If anyone has white spots on their skin, priest has to look at them. If they're white, if the spots are dull white, only a rash, we're good to go. A man might become bald. A man might lose hair from the side of his head. He's clean. It's only like any other kind of baldness. But if there's a white infection, red and white infection on the scalp, it's a skin disease. If the swelling of the infection is red and white and looks like leprosy on the other parts of the body, then he has scalp leprosy. Therefore, the person is unclean, and the priest has to warn the others. They must tear the clothes at the seams. They must let their hair grow wild, cover their mouth. They are unclean the whole time they have infection and needs to live in a leper colony. Some of the clothing might have mildew. It could be linen, wool, woven, knitted. Mildew might be on a piece of leather or something made from leather. If it's green or red, the priest has to look at it. And then the article needs to go in quarantine for 7 days. He has to look at it again. It doesn't matter if mildew is on the leather or cloth, or if the cloth is woven or knitted. It doesn't matter what it was used for. If it's spread, it's unclean because of the infection and therefore must be burned. If there's no spreading, it just must be washed. Doesn't matter, again, what type it is. The people to wash it, and then it needs to be separated again for another 7-day quarantine. If it still looks the same, it's unclean. Doesn't matter if the infection hasn't spread, it must be burnt. So regardless if it's cleaned, if it's still there, or if it spreads even after it was cleaned, it needs to just be burned. If the priest looks at the piece of leather or the cloth and mildew's faded, the spot must be torn out of that leather or cloth. because the mildew might come back to that piece. But if it happens that the mildew is spreading, the object must be burned. So those are the rules for mildew. So they think about that. When what we consider mildew today, they equated mildew to leprosy. So that's interesting. But yeah, that's all 56 verses of leprosy and mildew, skin diseases. So here are the rules. I talked about Leviticus 14:2-32 being rules for those that dealt with skin diseases. So let's go through those. Uh, a priest must look at those who had skin disease, go to the camp that they were in to see if they've been healed, if they're healthy. The priest tells them to do this. Bring 2 clean birds that are alive, a piece of cedar wood, a piece of red cloth, and a hyssop plant. Then the priest must order 1 bird to be killed in a clay bowl over running water. He must take the other bird that's still alive and the piece of cedar wood, the piece of red cloth, and the hyssop plant and dip them in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. So this is still at the time where blood sacrifices were an atonement of healing, or kind of like the healing ritual. After this is done, he must sprinkle the blood 7 times on those who had the disease and they are now clean. And then the priest needs to go to an open field to let the living bird go free. People going through the purification ceremony must wash all their clothes, shave all their hair, wash with water. They will be clean. They may then go into the camp, but they stay outside their tent for 7 days. At day 7, they must shave up all their hair, their head, their beard, their eyebrows, yes, all their hair. Wash their clothes, bathe their bodies in the water, then they're clean. On the 8th day, anyone who had a skin disease must take 2 male lambs that have nothing wrong with them, and a female lamb that has nothing wrong. 24 cups of fine flour mixed with oil for a grain offering, and 2/3 of a pint of olive oil. The priest must then bring the person and those sacrifices before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. The same priest that announced the person is clean needs to be there. The priest will take one of the lambs and the oil as a guilt offering, lift them in front of the Lord to show that they were being presented to God. The priest will then kill the male lamb, where they kill the sin offering and the burnt offering. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest, so therefore it's holy. The priest takes some of the blood from the guilt offering. He will put some of the blood on the tip of the right ear of the person to be made clean. The priest will put some of the blood on the thumb of the right hand and on the big toe of the right foot of that person. The priest will also take some of the oil, pour it into his own left palm. The priest will dip his finger into the right hand, dip the finger of his right hand. Sorry, there's a lot to take in. Into the oil that is in his left palm and use it to sprinkle the oil 7 times before the Lord. Then he will put some of the oil that is in his palm on the person to be made clean. He will put that oil in the same places that the blood of the guilt offering was in. And he will also put the oil on the tip of the person's right ear, on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of the person's right foot. He will put the oil that is left in his palm on the head of the person to be made clean. And in this way, he will make that person pure before the Lord. Then the priest must offer the sin offering to make that person pure. After that, he will kill the animal for the burnt offering. Remember, there's a lot of ritualistic offerings that happen during this time. A poor person might not be able to afford all these things, so a poor person can use 1 male lamb as the guilt offering presented to God so that it be made pure. They only need 8 cups of fine flour mixed with oil to use for a grain offering, and then 2/3 of a pint of oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. Even poor people can afford them at the time. 1 bird will be the sin offering, and the other will be the burnt offering. On the 8th day, that person will bring these to the tent. The priest will take the lamb for the guilt offering, kill the lamb, take the blood, dip it on the right ear of the person to be made clean. Same stuff as before. Yes. The priest must offer 1 of the doves or young pigeons, whichever the person can afford. He must burn 1 of the birds as a sin offering, the other as the burnt offering. and needs to offer the birds with the grain offering. In this way, the person will be made pure before the Lord, and that person will become clean. These are the rules. We're done. So yes, that is everything. I hope you found that interesting. I think I know I did. Um, so to wrap all this up, let me give you the breakdown for what's going to happen until I see you guys again next Wednesday for Encounter Part 3. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Like I said, it was a little bit different. We tried some new stuff, so we'll see how it happens. On Friday, I'm kind of doing a newer video. I've done a couple of art streams on Facebook Live before, which if you're not following us on Facebook, I encourage you to do that. There's a link down in the description to go do that, or if you're on Facebook and see the video, just click the Bethany UMC Youth and Children's Group title and hit like, hit follow. It keeps you up to date on everything youth and children's ministry. But we're doing a 10 DIY crafts for Mother's Day. Mother's Day is on the 10th. And, we might not be able to go out and get the gifts that we want to give our moms. So why not try and make some at home? So, and I'm only going to try and use the resources that I have around me or at my house at the time. If I can't make them, which I'm going to try to do, on camera for you, we'll just review them and go from there. We'll see what happens. On Saturday, I'm announcing a brand new series. I've been excited to do this since I came up with the idea, but we are launching our Children's Sunday School series that I'm calling Children's Time. I don't have the finalized content of what we're doing. I'm torn between two different ones right now, so I'm hoping to have that finalized soon. But it's going to be fun. So stick with us Saturdays at 9 a.m. We'll start the process on that, and I hope to have a good time. And then Sunday, like we've been doing, we're going to dive into Bible Basics Week 6, and we're going to get into the New Testament finally. So we only have 3 more weeks left of that series. And then we'll be right back here for Encounter Week 3. So I'm going to pray us out, we're going to close, and I will see you Friday. Father God, we give thanks to you for being the Almighty Father, for being the good, good Father that you are. Know that you're close, your mercy will be given, regardless if we ask. To learn that you heal, you are the Almighty Healer. We saw today that you can cure the 10 lepers from leprosy, a severe disease back then. Now, while we can't do that today, we can cure people of loneliness. And I pray that those who take on the challenge that was given will hear from you who they need to talk to, and you will guide their tongue or their fingers, depending on if it's a phone or phone or text message, that you will help them say the words that they need to say. And we lift all this to you in your holy and wonderful name. Amen and amen. I will see you Friday for a fun DIY video. Until then, stay blessed.